The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Walking around Nanaimo can be a very different experience depending on where you live. Because of how the city's developed and amalgamated different areas over the years, the sidewalk network is incomplete. Members of the South End Community Association brought concerns around pedestrian safety in their neighbourhood to Nanaimo City Council this week. Intersections on Needham Street and the areas around Bayview School were highlighted as places residents wanted to see improvements. Oftentimes, when the city needs to dig up a road to do some other maintenance, like replacing a sewer line, they'll take the chance to put in pedestrian infrastructure as well. This summer, there are some planned utility upgrades for Princess Street in the South End, but sidewalks aren't part of the initial brief. The communication around that was an issue for South End Community Association Chair Sydney Robertson, who spoke with me the day after the meeting.
We've been told in the past that either when a developer builds something or when the city does upgrades is an opportunity to make these kind of changes. And we understood that. Sometimes it's really hard to wait for those things to happen, and we can sometimes be waiting a long time. So I think that's part of the community's reaction to hearing that sidewalks were not going to be necessarily included in this project. And I think it's just really important that we have really clear communication about this stuff.
After some dialogue and consultation with city staff, council decided to get some options from staff on the issue at an upcoming governance and priorities meeting, when unallocated pedestrian funds will be discussed. Robertson was pleased with council's willingness to consider the issue.
I think the biggest piece I took away was how open everybody was to talking about this and to looking for a tweak or an adjustment or something that we can do to make the plan a bit better. I really appreciated their openness about that.
Each year, Nanaimo sets aside at least $300,000 for pedestrian improvements around the city. Worth keeping in mind alongside that figure, Nanaimo's website estimates that it costs more than $2,000 for a single meter of sidewalk. Purely based on those numbers, the unallocated funds would cover around 150 meters of sidewalk in the city in a year. Nanaimo has also used lower cost measures for pedestrian infrastructure in the past, such as delineating bollards. For more on the South End Community Association's concerns, I spoke with Echo McNaughton.
My name is Echo McNaughton. I'm a resident of the South End. I live near Bayview School and the five-way intersection, and I've been involved in some advocacy with the city about getting some sidewalks and crosswalks.
And that advocacy took you to City Council earlier this week. Can you tell me a bit what you were presenting?
I was there as part of a CHLY delegation, so the South End Community Association. I was presenting about some of our concerns in the neighborhood, some specific things on the intersection of Nickel and Needham Street that students need to cross to get to Bayview School, up to Victoria Road and Needham Street, which is an infamous five-way stop at that end of town that causes people a lot of traffic problems because they can't see each other. And then up towards the back end of the school, there are no sidewalks on that side. So kids coming from the other side of the school need to walk right on the road to get around parked cars. And there's been quite a few safety concerns around that too.
And so what are you hoping to see maybe come out of that as regards those specific intersections you talked about?
So with Nickel and Needham, we recognize that we need to work with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure because it's under provincial jurisdiction. So we're looking for the city to set up a meeting for us, and so CHLY, the city, and MODI to talk together about some solutions that would make that crosswalk safer for kids. Last year, a crossing guard was hit there. She had both of her legs broken, and we just don't want to see that happen to anyone ever again, and especially not any kids.
Do you have any ideas? So that Nickel Street is a continuation of the highway, a big 4-lane road, almost the last intersection on your way out of town. What do you think could be done there from a pedestrian safety point of view?
So one thing I'd love to see is if they could put in flashing lights when there's actually a pedestrian who's hit the crosswalk button, so that it's more visible to people that there is a pedestrian there. And then when it's not a flashing light, that there are no pedestrians. It's just cars making left turns or whatever. And then possibly some sort of median in the middle of the road that, a pedestrian, if they got to the midpoint and somebody was coming, they could stand by for safety, but also visually, so it kind of shrinks the field and makes people want to slow down more there. Because when you're coming northbound on Nickel, that's the first stoplight after you've come off the highway, and people have a really hard time slowing down from what feels like a 2-lane open highway to suddenly almost a residential area pretty quickly.
And you also talked about the 5-way intersection in the area. Can you tell me maybe, first of all, about what some of the concerns you have are there and how you think they could be addressed?
Yeah. So it's a 5-way intersection. It's like your typical 4-way with an extra angle off one side at a funny direction. And what that does is on Needham, when you are going towards the water, so eastbound on Needham, you are a good 20 or 30 feet back from the rest of the stop signs. And a property pushes out into that corner and you can't actually see around the corner. So when you're going southbound on Victoria, if you're stopped at the stop line like you should be, you can actually see the other car. So people coming on Needham creep forward, stop, look again. But there's been a lot of close calls there where people have almost gotten in accidents. And then we've also had a lot of close calls with pedestrians because the crosswalk there is quite pushed back. It has gotten better recently with the clubhouse that was closed down, and that has reduced motorcycle traffic and some of the other traffic. And then recently we've had a sinkhole open up on that section of Victoria. So it's been closed for about 2 months or more. And that has really changed traffic patterns. And it's really kind of quieted everybody down because they get to that intersection, they pause and go, oh, I can't go that way, and then make a different decision. So it's been kind of a nice natural experiment.
Can you tell me maybe a little bit about how long you've been at this advocacy work and what the kind of process leading up to having this delegation at City Council has been like?
Sure. I moved to Nanaimo in the summer of 2021. And I pretty quickly realized that this 5-way stop, which is quite close to my house, is a real problem. And I almost got in accidents quite a few times. And I started calling city bylaw because I didn't know who else to call. I knew it was a municipal matter because it's a municipal road. And they did eventually put in a flashing light on top of one of the stop signs, which stopped working like a couple of weeks later. Hasn't worked in months. Nobody's come out to check on it. And then some of the neighbors got together because it's a common concern out there. We'd be standing outside in our yards chatting. They're like, yeah, we got to do something. There's no sidewalks here for people to walk on. People in scooters can't get around. There's curbs in silly places. So myself, another neighbor who's an occupational therapist, and another neighbor who has a background in urban development, got an article in the newspaper. We wrote a letter to the school board and got some support there. And then life got busy and we put it on pause for a bit. More recently, myself and some members of CHLY got together and we sat down and had a meeting about what we were going to do. And I mentioned that there's a public safety committee that the city has going and that they had a meeting coming up. I'm like, well, what if we presented to that? So I put in my application. They accepted it right away. And I realized that I was going to be presenting to this committee in about 5 days and that we needed to gather some new information. So I'd kind of kept the advocacy going with contacting some of the businesses in the area. So the Boys and Girls Club, there's a daycare in our area. There's other support services for students and whatnot. And they had been really supportive of this work. But everyone I talk to says, like, it's just so much work. We don't have the extra bandwidth to do this on top of all the other things we're doing. School's the same sort of way. So I found out I was going to be presenting in front of the Public Safety Committee. So I reached out to a bunch of those people again, made some new contacts as well. And in that process, I learned from the school that they had had a meeting with the city in January where they brought up their concerns and desire to have a sidewalk on the back end because of their safety concerns. And that the city had pretty much dismissed their concerns and said, like, that is not going to happen. So as soon as the neighbors heard about that, we're like, oh, no, we need to do something about this. We need to support our school. So people started writing in letters. We made the presentation. And then Monday night, we were at City Council.
And can you tell me how you feel like that went? What was the response you got from councillors?
I thought it was pretty positive overall. A lot of really good questions were asked, some valid concerns are raised. But overall, it felt like they want to work together with us to find a solution. They're open to creative solutions or some more traditional ones. And they want to make sure that they have the money in the budget to do this for our area, but also there are other areas in the city that would also like these things. So I get why they're wanting to be responsible and make sure that they can replicate this for when other groups come forward and are going to ask for the same sort of thing.
One of the points brought up at the meeting was, I know there were some comparisons made to maybe more recently developed areas in the north end of town and some of the infrastructure they have. It was brought up that in some of those cases, it was the developers who built the infrastructure and who therefore paid for it. What do you make of maybe the way some of our pedestrian infrastructure in the town, which is a bit of a hodgepodge? It's different depending on where you go. What do you make of the way that is kind of pragmatically built?
I would love to see that the areas that were built long enough ago that they didn't have that sort of infrastructure as part of their development process, maybe they came in and they've had some infill, that we get that sort of infrastructure over time as well. That the answer isn't just, well, you didn't get it then, so you're not getting it now. But there should be a strategy for building that in as time goes on and a budget for that. And that maybe with any redevelopment that happens, because there is quite a bit happening in the South End. That was also part of the City Council meeting last night, that there's a way to expand that instead of doing just in front of a building. Maybe you do the whole block so it benefits the whole community, building that sort of thing in.
And one thing that was raised as well was the city says on their end that these days 1 meter of sidewalk costs over $2,000. What do you just make of that fact?
I find that really frustrating to hear that there's been such an escalation in costs in recent years. When that was given as the reason why we can't have sidewalks, to me, the logical thing would be, well, we need to kind of do as much work as possible, as soon as possible, because next year it's going to be more expensive. And the year after that, it's going to be more expensive. And it's only going to get more expensive. So perhaps if 10 years ago, when that South End neighborhood plan had come out, more of that work had been done, we wouldn't be in this position now where it's so expensive to build just a sidewalk.
And it also came up at the time that, some of these areas, particularly around Bayview Elementary School, there were these plans done, 15 years ago around what is going to happen with them. What do you make of maybe some of those?
The plans that were made, so it's called the South End Neighborhood Plan. It was released or approved in 2010. They're fantastic. They have some great plans in there for expanding some sidewalks, for closing off View Street to make that 5-way intersection a 4-way and put in some community gardens there, while still maintaining access for the residents on that area. They have some really great, thoughtful, and creative ideas in there that I would love to see implemented. I'm a little bit sad that it hasn't been done yet, so I'm hoping maybe we can do it now.
So for you, what are the next steps to make this happen? City Council, there was a kind of a motion to defer, to keep looking into this. Maybe you're going to have a meeting with the province and the city.
Yeah, so we have a couple things we need to do next. One of the staff members of the city mentioned that they're going to set up a meeting between CICA, the city, and the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. So we will be following up with him and letting him know that we are really keen to get that going and making sure that happens. We are going to reach out to the school district some more. We've been in contact, but we haven't gotten as far in that process as we would like. So hopefully getting their support behind some of these upgraded infrastructures around the school. And yeah.
And maybe from your experience, not necessarily just in the South End, but if people have a concern about their community, something they want to see improved, something like I want a sidewalk on my street, what would you say from your experience is the way to get that going?
The best way is there's a form on the city website where you can type in your concern to do with things with infrastructure and send that in. The other thing is to email mayor and council directly. And then the biggest piece with this is to get people in your neighborhood who are sharing those concerns to work together on it. Because it makes a difference when there's more voices out there, and then following up with each other and keeping a bit of that pressure and keeping that advocacy up. I know it's hard work sometimes to keep the pressure on, but being consistent and saying like, no, we're sticky and we're going to keep asking for these things that we want makes all the difference.
Is there anything else you think it's important to bring to this conversation today?
We're just really looking forward to working with the city and how receptive they've been to what we've had to say. And I hope we can come up with some really great solutions that'll make the neighborhood safer and get people out walking more. It's been a priority of the city to do things like bike lanes, and we'd like to see some focus on pedestrian infrastructure.
Echo McNaughton speaking to me about her advocacy for sidewalks and crosswalks in Nanaimo's South End around Needham Street and Bayview School.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Support Midcoast Morning and CHLY's nonprofit newsroom today by becoming a sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. Local news can't survive without your support. Another way to help us out is to share this show with your friends and tell them why they should support us. Finally, if you're listening to the podcast edition of Midcoast Morning, go and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast feed you use. It helps people find us.
We're talking sidewalks and pedestrian infrastructure on today's show, following a trio of delegations to Nanaimo City Council on the subject. I spoke with the city's manager of transportation, Jamie Rose.
In the late 70s, early 80s, there were a number of improvement districts that were brought together under the umbrella of the city of Nanaimo. And so a lot of those districts were administered through the RDN or the Ministry of Transportation and Highways at the time. And so the standards to which they built roads were quite different than what we would expect today. They were much more of a rural context. Rarely did they include curb and sidewalk. We, as our city continues to grow and the aspirations for a more walkable community build, we start to see these holes in the system where people sort of highlight, I'd really like to walk, or I'd really like my kids to walk to school or to the park, etc. But I just don't feel comfortable. And so there's definitely a lot of areas where there's an absence of sidewalk, and we're really trying to. It's a challenge for us to address those as one-offs. And so over the last probably more than a decade, we've had a process for identifying and prioritizing areas. Many years ago, we did focus around schools, and then connectivity out from those. More recently, we've worked with council to build up a program to sort of take both a proactive and reactive approach. So we've, on the reactive side, we've used very sort of fundamental engineering metrics for prioritizing our pedestrian improvements, such as, traffic volumes, traffic speeds, collision history, things of that nature. But we've also layered in things that are more proactive through the lens of land use. And not just current land use, but aspirational land use. So what we would see in our city plan for areas that we want to increase land density and mixed use and promote more walkability.
As you alluded to there, Nanaimo's had a crosswalk improvement prioritization tool that kind of gives a score to each crosswalk in the city based on a number of factors. Could you tell me maybe what are some of the highest priority intersections according to that tool right now?
I'd have to look it up, but just sort of being mindful of what the criteria are. Our highest land use density areas around our urban centers. So, for example, downtown, University, the hospital area, Country Club, Woodgrove. Also ones that have our major roads. So like Boa and Uplands, Third, Wakesaya. Those are all areas that will, without looking it up and confirming it, but those are areas that will quite likely float to the surface.
And the intersections in the South End at the South End Community Association has been doing some advocacy around specifically the five-way intersection at View, Needham, and Victoria, and then some of the ones along Needham and Nickel, which I know is provincial jurisdiction. But are those on the city's radar? Can you speak to maybe where they're at?
Definitely. So, as you touched on, the Nickel intersection is not within the city's jurisdiction, but it is definitely an area that we understand as can be challenging for pedestrians. It's a very high vehicle volume intersection. It can also be a very high speed intersection, and we have been working with the ministry on adjusting things with respect to the traffic signal to make it more pedestrian friendly. Unfortunately, without significant civil construction changes, it is a bit of a challenge. But then as we sort of migrate to the west or travel to the west, towards Bayview Elementary, there are a number of, so if you follow the Needham corridor, we do have a continuous sidewalk along there. And then as you touched on, we do have a five-way all-way stop intersection. Multi-leg stops like that are interesting. I don't know of too many five-leg intersections outside of Nanaimo. I know we have 3. And I know that there are some folks that have identified some discomfort in navigating that. I will highlight, though, that it is a stop control. So, vehicles are expected to come to a stop before proceeding through it. So, obviously, driver behavior is somewhat beyond our control, but anecdotally, we have looked at it, and we're not seeing any information or data that suggests that there's some concerns that need immediately to be addressed. But we do understand that having a pedestrian navigate through that is not can be uncomfortable for some. We do continue then up towards the school, and there are a number of other marked crosswalks that are not stop controlled. So they're the standard black and white signs. And those ones, to be honest, don't rank all that high. They're sort of about the middle of the pack for our system right now. And I think one of the key things that produces that number is fairly low volume roads and very low density land use. And so, and there's no transit in the area, which is sort of a pro and con. But I think really the thing that I would really highlight is that the roads around Bayview Elementary, are largely local roads. And so, the volumes and the speeds we expect to see on those are quite slow, and low. And so, as an example, in our road standards, when we are constructing a new local road, we do include sidewalk, but we don't explicitly include cycling facilities. And so it is our expectation that on these local roads, drivers are driving to the condition, which is slow.
It is in the South End Community Plan, which was adopted in 2010 to evaluate the feasibility of closing the section of Old Victoria Road intersecting Needham Street to vehicle traffic to create a linear park, or to create a one-way northeast and reversing on View Street in front of Bayview School. It's kind of listed as a medium-term objective. Is that what you were talking about there? Has that kind of been looked at and decided that that's not a priority after all?
I wouldn't say that it's not a priority. I think it's. I think these are things that would all be sort of assessed to varying degrees as we go through and identify future transportation projects. I think that so just jumping back a little bit, one of the processes that we are going through, particularly around schools or directly around schools, is what we call an active school travel program. And that actually has quite a bit of history. These plans started almost 20 years ago in partnership with ICBC, and then they were called Safe Route to School programs. And so historically, they were used to identify challenges or sticking points for people walking or biking to and from school. And so what would happen is there'd be a working group cast with the school district, the city, ICBC, the RCMP, and sort of have a discussion about what are some of the concerns that are being identified, and what are some of the options or the opportunities to address them. And so Bayview actually went through one of those programs quite some time ago. I believe it was 2008, but I could be wrong. And there was some reconfiguring of roads at that time. And there was also a number of projects that came out of that, which included sidewalk along the frontage of the school, as well as some defined walking shoulders and an additional crosswalk on 5th Street. But when we talk about that, the fifth leg of that intersection, it's a little bit more complicated than that because it actually provides access to a number of properties. And so, I think the idea of transitioning it into a lineal park or something of that nature has a lot of merit, but I think there's a process that we would need to go through that would involve a lot of consultation with property owners and businesses to understand how it would affect them to if we did that. So as I say, it's definitely not off the table. It's just something that takes a great deal of effort to go through. And so that would be our path forward on that.
Jamie Rose is the manager of transportation for the city of Nanaimo. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom and more. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. If you're already a supporter, record a voice memo telling others where you're listening from and why they too should support our work. After you're done, you can email it to us. Also, share the podcast with your friends. While Meta is blocking Canadian users from sharing news content on their Facebook feeds, you can still share our podcast directly with your friends via Facebook or Instagram Messenger. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.